Hey everybody, what's up? This is your girl Dragon and I have another quick live help tutorial request here for you. This is for the UEFN Hub Community. What's up you guys? This is going to be for Wazi. I hope I'm saying your name right there. And he wanted to make a mechanic in which a player's score would reset back to 0 when another player leaves the game entirely. So he wants the score to continue to be active while they're within the game, but if someone decides to leave the game, he wants it to reset to 0. This is a great mechanic for a 1v1, especially if you have like a free-for-all and you want it to be for this particular area. Awesome mechanic. Let me go ahead and run the play test, and if this is what you're looking for, we're going to go through the settings. So let's go ahead and let's go. Alright, players spawn in and they both have a score of 0. And let's see here. Alright, every time a player is eliminated, it's going to be checking for player. But when the player comes back, the timer is going to reset. Again, checking for player because player has left and timer has reset. Now the score will only go to 0 when the player decides not to come back. So let's say, for instance, I make another elimination and player decides they don't want to play anymore. They're going to leave the game. And it's going to continue checking for players until the time runs out. When the time runs out, it's going to reset the score to 0. All right. Player can still come back into the game. Right. Both players are both at 0. And when they spawn in, it's going to disable the player counter so they can start up again, because it's going to enable when a player is eliminated. So there we go. You see the timer. You see the counter there, the timer as well, and it starts over basically in a cycle, right? So like player come back and decide to retaliate, right? And you know, maybe player attacks me, but if I leave this lobby, then there might be some issues there. I can go ahead and leave and go to the hub to see what happens. I haven't quite tested that yet, but since I'm the one hosting this lobby, I won't do that. But you can see, let's see, player decides to leave again. And the timer will then again check for player, right? All right, so score resets to 0. And you can see the other team still does have their points. That is another obstacle that we will tackle, but the general part of it is pretty much handled. So let me go ahead and end the game. Right, and to handle that, to set the player back to start, basically when they spawn back in, there needs to be an event set to basically reset and reload them back to 0. So then what you could do here is basically, you know, set on the spawn pads or the channel device that I have here. to reload player. Now, the players won't come here until they leave the game or when they first start the game. When they're eliminated, they're going to spawn back on these checkpoint pads so that it does not affect the events being called on the spawn pads. So let's go ahead and set that, right? So let's see, we're going to go to save point, and then I can go into the additional settings. So we're going to do load or save, clear the data. So let's just do clear data for player. That loads here, and that way it's more specific. If you want to try clear data for all players, you can definitely test that out. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the structure of what's going on here. When a player is spawned and the game just starts, it disables the player counter. And it registers the player to their checkpoint pads. So this player will be registered to this pad, and this player will be registered to this pad. This is because when they spawn in, they're going to start here, and when the game, or when they're eliminated in the game, they will respawn here. That way it doesn't call the same events twice. I only want these events called on these spawn pads one specific time. Next, we have a score manager that keeps score upon elimination. A player counter that only enables during a specific event, and that is when the player is eliminated. It does not compare to target until the timer succeeds. We have two score managers. One is just to display score and reset score to 0, and the other is to actually manage and keep the score. This is a score manager that players do not see. We have a save point device that saves the player when they spawn in at a 0 state and loads the player again when the timer succeeds. We have a channel device that acts as an array for the player spawn pads, meaning that when the players spawn in, it transmits a signal to either activate or deactivate other devices. We have an Elimination Manager that controls elimination, and it watches for if a player is eliminated or makes an elimination. And it sends an event depending on those particular occurrences. Then we have a timer that displays. For the tutorial, it is displayed on the HUD, and this timer is enabled, showing that it is checking to see if there's still players inside the game. Those are the devices that you need, and I know this is probably a little bit more than you have that I've seen that you've had, and let me go ahead and show you the settings. All right, so let's go. First, starting with the spawn pads. Let's start with player 1. All right, I'm just going to go through this so I don't lose my voice by talking quite so much. So be sure to take a look at all these. This is my third live help tutorial today. So let's see, they are receiving an item when they're spawning in and then registering to the checkpoint pad. It's going to clear the data for the player. And this is when the channel device is going to transmit upon the player spawned. Okay, and then for spawn pad for player 2, And you can see it's very similar. So it's connected to the devices for it, like this is connected to that. All right, next is the displaying score manager. Again, this is just for display. And I'll put DSPLY, short for display. And we have a score value of 0, a scored award type of add. It's going to change to 1 when it's activated, and so forth. For functions, we're going to reset when receiving from the timer device, and that's going to reset it back to 0. And increment when receiving from the Elimination Manager when a player is eliminated or on elimination. So every time a player makes an elimination, it's going to increment this by 1 point, and there's no events there. All right, next is the player counter. So we're going to compare player to count equal or more. There must be 2 players, at least 2 players in this game. We're not going to compare at game start. We're not going to compare on count change. We're going to be focusing on the last instigator, and it can be on any team. It is not enabled on any phase because we're going to basically enable it when there's a certain event. Alright, and then for functions, we're going to compare players to target when receiving from player counter when the player is counted. So this particular counter is going to compare itself to the target once a player is counted. This is when the player comes back into the game. It's going to basically call an event. And then for the timer, we're going to compare players to target when it's successful. All right, we're going to enable when receiving from the Elimination Manager when a player is eliminated. We're going to disable when receiving from the channel device, and I named that channel T4 Save Reset when it receives a transmission. All right, and then for events, when the count succeeds, that's when we're going to reset the timer device. That means that there's enough players in the game and the game can continue. Whenever a player is counted, we're going to send an event to the timer device to reset and the player counter to compare players to target. That should be bounded from the other side. When a player is removed, we're going to send an event to start the timer to check for players. All right, and that's it. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the Elimination Manager. It is enabled on game start and so forth. And let's see, on eliminated, we're going to send an event to the timer device to start and player counter to enable. These things should be already bounded if you set it up over there. And then let's see, elimination, we're going to send an event to score manager, T display to increment, score manager T4 to activate, and score manager T4 to increment, right? And score manager T4 is right here. That's the actual score manager that's keeping score, right? And that's it for your events. Let's go ahead and take a look at the score manager T4. So score value is 0, we're adding. And what's interesting about this is score change when activated is 0. All right, and you see the rest there. We're going to activate when receiving from Elimination Manager on elimination, and increment when receiving from Elimination Manager on elimination. Next is the save point device. So this is enabled during the gameplay only and so forth. we will save a score, and when players come into the game, they should have 0 points. We're going to load player when receiving from timer device T4 on success, enable when receiving from channel T4 save reset when receive transmit, and clear data from players when receiving from timer device T4 on success, player spawner on player spawned, player spawner 1 on player spawned. We're also going to clear data from for all players when receiving from timer device T4 on success. We're going to save all players when receiving from channel T4 save reset. That's our channel device when it sends out a transmission. And we're going to load all players when receiving from timer device T4 on success. And there are no events. Next is the channel device. So that's channel T4 save reset. And what we're going to be doing here is transmitting when player 1 and 2 spawn from the spawn pad. And when it transmits, we're going to send an event to the save point to enable, the save point to save all players, and the player counter to disable. So meaning when the players come into the game, it's going to disable that player counter so that it's not going to start until a particular event. It's not going to compare to target until a particular event. And that event starts when a player is first eliminated. All right, let's move on to the timer device. So you can actually shorten this duration here. I have it set on a 10-second buffer. My island is set for players to respawn in 1 second. However, I realize sometimes it takes a little bit longer than that, even if you do have it set to 1 second. I highly advise you to test it out to see how your map is performing. 10 seconds I think is a good amount of time. However, you can reduce that and run some tests. We're going to be counting down. It's not going to start at game start. Players cannot interact. This does apply to everyone and so forth. And make sure that when it is complete, we're going to reset the timer. Visible during game is only timer. However, if you want to set to HUD only, set it to hidden. And let's see, my message is checking if player left. And let's see here, showing HUD is yes. And there you go. For functions, we're going to start when receiving from Elimination Manager T4 on eliminated, player counter T4 on player removed. And then we're going to reset when receiving from player counter T4 on count succeeds and player counter T4 on player counted. And that is it. For events though, we've got quite a lot. On success, we're going to send an event to save point T4 to load player, save point T4 to clear data from player, save point T4 to clear data from all players, save point T4 to load all players. Again, all this should be binded already. Player counter T4 to compare players to target, score manager display to reset. And that's it. That's how you make this amazing mechanic request. And I think it's really cool. Definitely something that would integrate into some practice games really well. I hope it helped. And if it did, be sure to drop a sub and a like and share it with anyone else you think would help them too. All right, that's going to do it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.